Apple's just announced the Mac Studio along with the new M1 Ultra chip in their 2022 spring event, Peak Performance. And it is literally insane how powerful this thing is, especially given the tiny size. And while the rest of YouTube is here to tell you that this is the greatest thing ever, I'm here to throw a little bit of cold water on it. Let me explain. Okay, so a very quick overview of what was just announced. And honestly, I don't want to spend too much time on this because there are plenty of other videos on YouTube that will recap everything for you. But this is just sort of important to have a little bit of context here. At the event, the star of the show was the M1 Ultra, a new chip that is quite literally 2x as powerful as the M1 Max because it's basically two of them glued together. Now, whether we believe the dubiously vague graphs that they showed us about performance or not, it's safe to say that this new chip is nothing short of an engineering masterpiece. The fact that they're able to truly double the performance of the M1 Max is not something we've ever really seen in processing. And Apple even called out that while you do see multi-chip setups that has been done before, that usually leads to a pretty substantial loss in performance. Not with the M1 Ultra. And with this new M1 Ultra came the Mac Studio, a new naming convention for Apple that is essentially a double-stuffed Mac Mini. This Mac Studio has two main configurations, the M1 Max and that new supersized M1 Ultra. And with it, you also get the Studio display, which is kind of a scaled-down version of their Pro Display XDR. You can basically think about this display as an iMac display that has had the computer innards removed from it, because for all intents and purposes, that's what it is. It's a 27-inch 5K Retina display with, if the MacBook Pro is any indication, what could turn out to be some great built-in speakers and a webcam. But that is a story for another video, so be sure to subscribe so you can check that one out. With that recap out of the way, let's quickly take a look at why this machine is an absolutely awesome one on one hand, but on the other hand, I think it is going to be a little bit of a flop. Now, at a high level, this Studio lineup is very exciting. And don't get me wrong, I am an Apple homer just as much as you are. So before you go hating me in the comments, I'm just trying to provide a little bit of a different perspective here. So as I mentioned, there are two key configurations with some customization within those. The M1 Max is essentially the same thing that we've seen on the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, so I don't really think we need to cover that much further. It's basically the same thing. The M1 Ultra, however, is where things get a little bit more interesting. They've touted that it has up to 5x better CPU performance, can render almost 5x faster than something like the Mac Pro or the 27-inch iMac, which has been discontinued, by the way. And now, of course, those numbers do need to be tested. I'm sure you'll see that all over YouTube. The M1 Ultra Mac Studio can also support up to 18 streams of 8K ProRes 422 video playback, can support up to 4 Pro Display XDR monitors if you just happen to have 5,000 monitors sitting around. And it actually has an impressive amount of ports on both the front and the back of the machine. So who is this actually made for? Well, this very capable machine is definitely targeted at a very particular type of user. In fact, the name even tells us as much, the Mac Studio. This is made for the true pros, people who have a creative studio, creating massive projects. Again, 18 8K ProRes streams. Raise your hand if you've ever worked on a project that has anything close to that much data in it. That's what I thought. Apple's transition to Apple Silicon now meets a whole host of needs for their different user segments. We have the M1 MacBook, MacBook Air, Mac Mini for those consumer level needs. We have the M1 Pro and the MacBook Pros for the person who needs a little bit more juice. And honestly, we've seen from all the tests that even the baseline M1 Pro machines are more than what 90% of people need. Then we have the M1 Max MacBook Pro and now Mac Studio for the creative professionals who have a bit too much money to spend because, again, most people don't even need that much power anyways. And we have now this M1 Ultra Mac Studio for the true professional, the Pixars and the Disneys and the Capitol Records of the world, the people who need insane multicam setups or working on the next Marvel movie. At least that's what the specs and the marketing is kind of pointing out. Because the thing is, we already have the M1 Max, which again is more than the normal creative professional is really likely to need. Definitely us silly YouTubers. You've seen some of the tests. I've run my own tests. I've never come close to the limit of what my machine, the M1 Max, is capable of. So if the Mac Studio is targeting this super pro user, that's great. They've got an ultra small form factor, an ultra awesome M1 Ultra, they're ultra. And if the event ends there, I foresee loads of people rushing out to update their studios with an editing bay filled with these puppies. But the event didn't end there. Instead, we got this little sneak peek.
Making our transition nearly complete with just one more product to go, Mac Pro. But that is for another day.
Now look, who am I to question the marketing decisions of the greatest marketing company in the history of marketing companies? But I think that was a mistake. If you leave this out, people are left wondering, is this what we've got to work with? Well, all right then, I'll go ahead and buy it. Instead, we have those pros who are hovering over the add to cart button and pausing for a moment because they see what's coming with the Mac Pro, or they at least assume what's coming with the Mac Pro. And the Mac Pro is obviously the true professional machine. That's what's already in all of these studios that we're talking about. And that's what they're going to wait for the mega upgrade. Apple called the Mac Studio a modular machine, but it isn't really. There's no PCIe, we can't swap out or customize any of it. There's really the only customization is that we can buy our own keyboard and mouse because it doesn't even come with a keyboard or mouse. And the thing is, if you've waited this long for the Apple Silicon refresh, you're probably okay to wait a little bit longer to get the real deal. So that's where I'm a little bit hung up. We spend the majority of this event hyping up this insanely cool computer, the high end of which really only makes sense for the true proest of pros. But then at the very end, you tell those very same pros, psst, we've probably got something better that you're going to want to wait for right around the corner. And that's what really makes me think that this isn't really going to be a very great selling computer for Apple. The lower tiered options of the Mac Studio are awesome and honestly are a pretty decently priced computer given the specs and the form factor, of course, as well. But this upper tiered Ultra is something that really has me perplexed. If it's more than most people need, but not enough modularity and customization for the people who it actually makes sense for, why even make it? Now I can only assume that if this tiny little box of a Mac Studio left us wowed at the performance charts that they showed us, then I have a feeling that what they have coming next is going to be truly mind-blowing. I'll personally be sticking with my M1 Max MacBook Pro, but either way, I've got my popcorn ready for what's to come. So YouTube thinks that you will like watching this video next. I suggest you tap it and see if they're right. I'll see you in the next one.